David. This is Boom Bust, and these are the stories we are tracking for you today. Well, the Trump stock rally enters day 2 as gold takes a tumble. I'll have a look at markets around the world coming right up. Then it's a state takeover of a U.S. gambling mecca. I'll tell you why New Jersey just moved to seize control of Atlantic City straight ahead. Plus, Turkey and the EU trade jabs over the refugee crisis. What could that mean for European leaders as they head into critical elections? Ed Harrison will weigh in. We've got that and so much more lined up for you on today's show. Don't go anywhere. It all starts right now. Well, it's being called a Trump bounce. For the second day now post-election, the stock market has rallied. On Thursday, the Dow extended its gains, ultimately closing at a record high. And markets in the Asia Pacific, it seems, followed the U.S.'s lead, with Japan's Nikkei closing up 6.7% and Australia's stock exchange up by 3.3%. But Europe was no longer buying into the same optimism. The Euro Stoxx 50 ending the day down 0.32%. Meanwhile, gold futures headed lower on Thursday to below $1,300 an ounce. The metal took a complete 180-degree turn from where it was just a day before, reaching a 6-week high in the election's immediate aftermath. The recent developments seemingly has gold analysts divided on what's ahead for the precious metal. While many believe gold will decline on growing expectations of economic stimulus and rising inflation under a Trump presidency, others have said they still believe gold is on a bull run, arguing that its fate is more closely linked to the global economy, which they believe could see more upheaval next year. Well, the state of New Jersey now has total control over Atlantic City. The state government says it has lost patience with the gambling resort's inability to pay its bills. But many residents are up in arms over the move. And joining me now to discuss is RT correspondent Ashley Banks. Ashley, good to have you. So tell me, let's take it back a second for those people who are not keyed into what's going on there over in Atlantic City. What's the real issue here?
Well, Amir, since 2014, about 4 casinos in Atlantic City have been shut down. Now, as a result of that has caused the city's tax base to plummet altogether. Now, it's blown a $100 million hole in the budget. Atlantic City is home to about 39,000 residents, and it's also home to about $500 million in debt. Wow. Now, Chris Christie and state lawmakers, they've been making a fuss over this whole thing since January, and they decided to do something about it. Now, Chris Christie, he signed a rescue package back in May, giving local officials about 150 days to come up with a 5-year recovery plan. The state would then impose a takeover if that plan were to be rejected. Now, the State Department of Community Affairs, they shot down the city's proposal last week. And just yesterday, the local finance board voted 5-0 to finalize the takeover. And Chris Christie is saying, this is what's necessary. This is what's needed to prevent the city from going bankrupt.
Yeah, and as I understand, people are saying that this really benefits his administration. What are they talking about?
Yeah, this decision definitely will benefit his administration. Now, it gives the state the power to assume key functions that local leaders usually have control over, such as renegotiating union contracts, hiring and firing employees, selling city assets, reversing decisions of the city council, and much more. Now, I want to mention that this is the first time in about 14 years that the state is taking over a city. Now, back in 2002, the state also took over Camden.
Wow. And tell me, how are New Jersey residents responding to this?
Yeah, so the residents, we have city officials and union leaders. They attended Wednesday's meeting as a last-ditch effort to try and stop this takeover. They were saying that the city shouldn't be a ward of the state. Solicitor Anthony Swan, he urged the board to just use powers needed to fix the city's finances and not to use their power to take over the city, saying that people are just frightened as to what the state could possibly do. Now, the president of the city's white-collar workers union, he asked the state to work with the unions and only break contracts as a last resort. But of course, the board members, they completely ignored that as they have another agenda. But city officials have come out and said, if need be, they're going to sue the state.
Yeah, and we have seen a back and forth between Christie and unions in the state for quite a while. So this is, of course, what he wanted. This is the best case scenario for him. And let's point out that Chris Christie, of course, the governor of the state, is a Trump supporter. He ran in 2016. He didn't quite make the cut. But he, as far as we understand, is going to be promised some kind of position in Trump's upcoming administration. People are talking about attorney general. Just want to get your thoughts on what is the sense over how that sort of fits in with the crisis he's dealing with at home.
Yeah. So as we know that this vote for New Jersey to take over Atlantic City, it came just a day after Republican nominee Donald Trump were elected to become our next president. Now, as you said, Christie, he may have a cabinet position as attorney general, which would mean he would have to step down from his position as governor. But a lot of people in New Jersey, they're really upset over this. Not the fact that he may be leaving, but because they think he's unfit to help assist in running this country. They say he couldn't even help run his own state. I want to read you a quote from Steve Young. He's a community activist in Atlantic City. And he said, this is an example of what this country could turn out to be under Chris Christie and President-elect Donald Trump taking away our rights and sovereignty. Who do we talk to as residents? What will government look like with the state of New Jersey overpowering the residents? We're headed for some bad times, and your city could be next. So, Mira, people are just upset that Donald Trump is our next president, but they're also upset, especially in New Jersey, that Chris Christie could be a part of this administration.
Sure. And I'm sure there are a lot of critics out there that are just upset that he's not going to be able to necessarily finish the job that he started, of course, in overseeing this crisis and the management of the crisis altogether. All right, that's all we have time for. RT correspondent Ashley Banks, thanks so much. All right, and turning now to oil. Oil prices are on the brink of tumbling once again as OPEC production hits a new all-time high, thereby increasing the global supply. RT's Alex Mihailovich has been following this story for us from Toronto, and he joins me now. Alex, the International Energy Agency is raising some real concern here. What are the markets telling us?
Well, oil's dropped today by 61 cents on the New York Mercantile Exchange. That's down to $44.66. Now, not a huge drop, but you have to consider it is a drop. And the reason why, we're looking at, during the month of October, the amount of oil being pumped up went up by 800,000 barrels a day. And that's up to 97.8 million barrels of oil a day. Now, a lot of it's to be blamed on OPEC countries, especially countries that you wouldn't really think are making a big mark, but it's Iraq, it's Libya, as well as Nigeria. Now, Iraq, all three countries we know are affected by ISIS or ISIS-like groups, Boko Haram in Nigeria, but it doesn't seem to be making a difference. They're pumping out oil like crazy, which is really bringing the supply on the market to a higher level. Now, outside of OPEC, also there's countries to blame, like Canada. So Canada, Russia, Venezuela, Brazil, and other nations, they're pumping out more oil, and that is bringing tons of oil to the market. This surplus that we're seeing, there's a good chance it's going to run into its third year in 2017. And with that, there is a chance that oil prices might plummet again. We know they dropped from $120 a barrel down to what we saw just in the past year. So it is a big difference.
Yeah, a lot of people very worried about this, specifically those investors out there that want to be bullish on oil, but just can't be because every time OPEC members and non-OPEC members talk about coming to some kind of deal to pull back on the supply, it never fully gets executed. But as I understand, they are going to be taking another stab at this. OPEC members will be gathering yet again at the end of the month. Any sense as to what we can expect?
Well, November 30th, they're going to be gathering in Vienna, and here, the question is, again, will they be able to do anything? It's very difficult to enforce these individual nations within OPEC and to make them bring down the amount of barrels they're producing a day. What OPEC hopes to do is bring it down to their production, not from outside of OPEC, but their own production to about 32.5 million to 33 million barrels a day. Now, that would make some kind of difference, but again, as I mentioned, very difficult to enforce. There's nothing there really with teeth that would make a country do anything other than what that country wants to do. Also, let's put this in the equation. I know we can't do a single story without Donald Trump today, it seems, but this is a Donald Trump thing again. Trump, he's into the fracking thing. The Keystone XL pipeline out of Canada, he's a fan of that. That means more oil production, possibly as soon as 2017, going into 2018, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. More oil on the market means another addition to the surplus that already exists. And when you see that, well, you know what happens to prices when there's that big of a surplus.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why the oil sector really was going a little crazy yesterday, why they were excited over the Trump win. And really, Alex, the problem is that the IEA also believes oil demand will be flat in 2017. So given the weak scenario with the output growing and the demand weakening, that's leaving investors very bearish. Alex Mihailovich reporting for us in Toronto. Thank you so much. All right, still ahead here on Boom Bust, we will explore why investors are seemingly bullish on a Trump economy. Plus, Turkey and the EU trade jabs over the refugee crisis. What could that mean for European leaders as they head into critical elections? Ed Harrison will weigh in on the other side. Stay with us. And as we go to break, here are the numbers at the closing bell.
Andre Ward called you a bully.
He will answer for everything in November.
Well said. Do you feel like you're fighting for your country as well?
Russia, in the Russian streets, gave me all what I have, all my skills. Winner of this fight, really like pound for pound breath, why not?
Why not? Most people think to stand out in this business, you need to be the first one on top of the story or the person with the loudest voice or the biggest ratings. In truth, to stand out in the news business, you just need to ask the right questions and demand the right answers. Question more.
They're the war hawks selling you on the idea that dropping bombs brings peace, to the chicken hawks forcing you to fight in the battles that they start.
The news hawks try to tell you that celebrity gossip and tabloid murder trials are the most important news today.
While the hawks of advertising tell you that you are not cool enough unless you buy their product.
Watching the hawks. Watching the hawks. These are the hawks that we, along with our audience, will be watching.
While the U.S. markets have been on a post-election tear these past few days, fully reversing the initial 5% fall in stock futures pricing on the night of the election and racing to a record closing high today. To discuss where we're headed from here, Merck Investments founder Axel Merck is on the show. Now, before we get into the market questions, I did first ask Axel about the idea floated by Trump's camp that JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon is being vetted as Treasury Secretary in Trump's new administration. Here's a look at what he had to say.
Jamie Dimon, that's a very interesting choice. I mean, I think Jamie Dimon has been burned talking politics, so I thought he might want to take a step back and get away from politics. So if he's really interested in, I actually, unlike what most people think, I actually think that he is a fairly level-headed guy. But of course, we love to hate the banks, and he is the symbol of that, and that's why a lot of people don't like him. But yeah, he certainly knows what he's doing, and so yeah, it would get a lot of heat. But overall, I do think that this bank, without making an investment recommendation here, is probably one of the better-run banks. despite all the criticism that they get in the media.
All right, fair enough. So let me ask you, I mean, when you look at this Trump victory, I know you've been tweeting about this, you've been following it. I mean, why do you think the polls really had it so wrong?
Well, because they call people with iPhones and not those with the pitchforks. I mean, it's the typical person that's been voting for Trump is not in the major cities, and of course, yes, the polling places, they're supposed to take that all into account and all that. But it's just in today's world, it's just like if you look at the different campaigns, the Clinton campaign did everything quote unquote right in the sense that they had the best ground game, they had this and this and this, whereas the typical Trump voter was focused more on social media and was able to kind of be reached through Twitter and the like. And so just as your program is available on social media, you are new style media, not old style media, and that's the sort of space where many voters are, and the traditional way of polling and all that just didn't capture that.
Yeah, it wasn't an accurate sample size. And Axel, not only were the polls wrong about this Clinton loss or Trump victory, but it seems pundits were wrong about how the markets would react if Trump was elected. I mean, in the last couple of days, we've seen the Dow surge as much as 180 points to new record highs after the Asian markets soared overnight. I mean, what's going on here?
Well, I don't know. I think a few days after the election, we don't know yet what the final verdict will be. I'll tell you in 4 years. I mean, the same with after the Brexit. The markets recovered right away. We have been taught to buy the dips, and obviously this happened to the extreme this time around. Now, clearly, in Asian hours, folks in Asia have a very different perspective than folks in the U.S. Liquidity is low, spreads are wide, it's easy to move the markets, and so I wouldn't count too much into what that's happening. Now, one way, though, that the market has reacted predictably is the bond market. The bond market has sold off because of the anticipation of greater fiscal spending. Now, if people think that everything is going to be great again, to use the campaign slogan, then maybe the future is bright. But I try to be an equal opportunity offender when it comes to politics, and I would allege that we are in a market that is pricing in perfection, that we have compressed risk premium, meaning we've taken fear out of the market. And as we're introducing risk, be that because of policies that we don't fully understand yet, or be that as the Fed may need to raise rates because of rising inflation and inflationary pressures because of the things that are happening in infrastructure spending, I would be very surprised if these markets can hold up. And so I would not give too much to this initial reaction. At the same time, of course, you've got to be humble and respect it. For the time being, the markets are happy.
Yeah, I had a guest on yesterday that made an interesting point about investors taking notes about what happened in the aftermath of Brexit, the Brexit vote in the UK, that the hysteria was relatively overdone and unwarranted. I mean, do you agree that not hitting the panic button was the right thing to do in the wake of this win?
Well, I think people should have a long-term asset allocation, and if you have a long-term asset allocation, you should have a balanced portfolio. But how on earth do you get a balanced portfolio when, quote-unquote, everything is expensive? Like to point out in the UK, for example, sure, if you're British investors, the stock market might have done okay, but your currency has tumbled. And so is everything really great in the UK? Toblerone, the chocolate there, they're putting less chocolate in there. I mean, that's kind of a disaster, isn't it? But does it really mean people's lives are changing? And so long-term, what's happening, if you take the currency point of view, for example, when you introduce trade barriers, and in the UK, the Brexit vote introduces trade barriers, it weakens the currency. I happen to think the Brits are going to go down the Italian road, meaning that they're going to have deficit spending, and they're not going to know how to finance it, and so they keep interest rates artificially low. And in that context, the currency is going to continue to deteriorate. Now, is everything great? Well, maybe, but it will have serious implications. Now, in the U.S., currently, we're happy. But yes, new policies will have serious implications. There will be winners and losers. And right now, the market is focusing on a positive. When it comes to my own asset allocation, I think about how can I be diversified. And that's not easy when, in quotes, everything is expensive.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to talk to you a little bit more about how to approach the market as an investor in just a second. I mean, but what do you really think will determine how vulnerable the markets are going forward?
Well, historically, at least in recent years, central banks and notably the Fed has had a huge influence. I've said risk premia are compressed. That sounds very fancy, but basically volatility has been too low in equity markets. Junk bonds haven't yielded enough. Bond yields have been too low. And as the Fed is trying to extricate itself from the policies it has had, as inflationary pressures are rising when you do infrastructure spending, but the unemployment rate is already low, you're going to get more inflation. That means that risk premium are going to go up. That means volatility should go up, and that means asset prices should be lower. And so that's really what I would be concerned going forward.
And speaking of the Fed, I mean, what do you think the Fed is going to do going forward in December?
Well, the market is pricing in a Fed rate hike. What I like to caution is that I don't think it matters really whether nominal rates go up. It matters what happens to real interest rates, meaning what happens after inflation. If you raise interest rates by 0.25% once a year, I would allege that inflationary pressures are rising faster than that. And so in many ways, on a real basis, interest rates are actually going down. So we have an extremely accommodative environment that's not really going to change. But if anything, because Trump's policies might accelerate the fiscal spending side, we're going to be falling further behind in the curve, which means inflation is going to move higher. And the Fed has to fall further behind the curve because I don't think these markets can survive a very, very tough Fed. And so it's going to be very, very interesting going forward.
It's big deal time. Ed Harrison is here with me. You may not be able to see him just yet. Oh, there he is. We're talking about Europe. Turkish President Erdogan is threatening to open the gates to refugees in a dispute with the EU. Erdogan let loose on Wednesday in frustration over stalled talks with the Eurobloc. Take a listen.
You know, those 3 million refugees in Turkey? They say there is a problem. They say, what if the negotiations end and Turkey opens the gates? Where would we put those 3 million refugees? That is their worry right now. That is why they cannot come to the end point on this issue.
I think he was a little bit angrier than it sounded in that voiceover, but the inflammatory words are expected to weigh upon elections in Europe next year in 3 important countries where the refugee issue has become a hugely controversial one. I'm talking about France, the Netherlands, and of course, Germany. So Ed, let's start right there. What is going on with Erdogan right now? What is going on with this spat between the 2 regions?
You know, I think that it's more of a political spat than a real spat in the sense that, number one, Germany and Turkey, their relations have deteriorated significantly, and that has a lot to do with the personalities of Erdogan on the one hand and Merkel on the other. You know, Erdogan's become more authoritarian. Merkel is very moralistic towards him, and that's created tension. And so that tension spilling over into the Turkey accession talks. No one in their right mind thinks that Turkey's ever going to accede to the EU anytime soon, especially because they're potentially going to impose a death penalty, which is something that you can't have if you're a part of the EU. So really, this is just a way for him to gain leverage and to act out in terms of his spat with Merkel and with the EU in general.
Give me a real quick sense of what the EU is really demanding of Turkey.
They're basically demanding that they act like a normal country within the EU in terms of not jailing journalists as they're doing now, in terms of civil liberties and things of that nature, in terms of justice system, etc.
So what is the sense that you are getting? I know you have your ear to the ground on European politics. You listen to all the European press. What is the sense you're getting as to what kind of impact this could have on elections 2017? We've got Germany, France, the Netherlands. What do you know?
I think that it's going to move people into thinking about the issue of refugees. It's hard to say, you know, how they're going to think about the issue, but if you look at the parties that had been surging before as a result of the refugee crisis, immigration issues, people will start thinking about those parties in that light and decide whether or not you know, this is an issue that they want to vote on. So it's going to keep that specific issue at the top of the table.
Okay, what parties are we talking about? What are the ones that are really coming up and threatening, you know, the mainstream the status quo.
Right. So there are three parties in particular that I would focus on, and we were talking about this earlier. There's in the Netherlands, it's the PVV, which is the Party for Freedom, led by Geert Wilders, who is someone that actually we had an interview with back in February when we were over there. Mm-hmm. We also can look at Marine Le Pen, National Front in France. And in Germany, the Alternative for Germany party, which is polling at about 13%. Marine Le Pen's polling at 30%, and Wilders and his party, they're polling at the 15 to 18% range. Now, by the way, even though Marine Le Pen is a true contender for becoming president, actually 15 to 18% is just behind the ruling party in the Netherlands. So the Wilders is actually doing really well in the Netherlands relative to other established parties.
Yeah, Marine Le Pen was one of the first European politicians to come out and congratulate Donald Trump, not even after having won, but before having saying that congratulations for being in the lead. So, you know, she was really trying to strike on the opportunity. But tell me, I mean, where does Trump really fit into this narrative, if at all? You know, I do understand that Merkel and Hollande have given him sort of a lukewarm congratulations.
Yeah, I think the way that I would say it is that he fits in the sense that he shows that a somewhat third-party-like individual is possible. Mm-hmm. And so people will look to him and they'll say, wait a minute, I know he's a standard bearer in the sense that he's with the Republican Party, but let me imagine Marine Le Pen or Wilders at the head of our government. Yeah. What would it be like?
So are Hollande and Merkel a little bit more apprehensive? Do they want to be cautious about being too warm to somebody like him because they think it would encourage?
It's hard to say. I think that it's coming from a visceral rejection of Donald Trump rather than any sort of strategic calculus.
Yeah, and as I understand, the UK's Theresa May was much more welcoming, though that's not entirely surprising given that she's a more conservative administration. Some have said that they can conceive of a trade deal. Do you think that
I can conceive of that, definitely. I think that when it comes to trade, NAFTA and things like the TPP are with countries that have much lower incomes per capita. The UK and the US, they're much more on par.
All right. Very, very good. Ed Harrison, thanks for that. We love hearing from you guys. Make sure you tweet at all of us, Edward NH, Bianca Fascini, Amira David. Remember, you can see all the segments featured in today's show on YouTube, youtube.com/BoomBustRT. From all of us here at Boom Bust, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.